Okay, so let's talk about Chen Jingyuan. He's a PhD scholar, a guy who spent his life studying something called complex systems theory. It's this really fascinating idea about how massive, unpredictable patterns, order and chaos, can pop up from millions of tiny individual choices. And the irony here is just wow, because his own small choices online were about to throw his life into total chaos. So what was this terrible crime he committed? Well, according to the state, he caused severe public order disruption. And his weapon of choice? Get this, it was the retweet button.
So welcome to The Scholar versus the State. We're going to open the case file on a legal battle that all comes down to a charge that's so vague, people call it a pocket crime. Basically, a law you can just pull out of your pocket to prosecute almost anything you don't like.
Here's how we're going to walk through this. We'll start with the arrest itself, then look at what the state accused him of. After that, we'll break down the scholar's pretty brilliant defense, see what the court decided, and finally, we'll hear from the man himself, writing from his prison cell.
All right, so it all kicks off in September 2022. PhD scholar Chen Jingyuan is at home, and he gets arrested. The entire case against him, the whole thing, is built on his activity on Twitter, and it all hinges on this one very specific, very strange charge: picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Now, you really have to understand this charge. Picking quarrels and provoking trouble is, well, it's notoriously vague. Legal experts call it a pocket crime for a reason. It's a catch-all law that's just ambiguous enough that you can apply it to almost anything, from a protest to, in this case, a tweet. And that ambiguity, it is the absolute key to this entire story.
So what was the state's official argument? I mean, how do you actually build a serious criminal case out of a handful of retweets?
The prosecution's case was actually pretty simple. Their logic went like this. Chen used software to get on the global internet. On there, he spread what they called false information. And by doing that, they argued, he caused severe public order disruption, which of course is against the law. Simple as that. And here is where the court's reasoning takes a really wild turn. They didn't just find him guilty. They actually weaponized his intelligence. Their argument was that because he's a highly educated person, he should have known better. His intelligence wasn't a defense. No, they treated it as proof that he knew exactly what he was doing.
So how do you fight back against that? Well, from his cell, Chen wrote this incredibly detailed appeal, and he just systematically took apart the state's entire case with 5 really powerful arguments.
His defense was basically built on pure common sense. First, he's like, what I shared wasn't false information. It was opinion, art, academic stuff. You can't fact-check an opinion. Second, he said he had no criminal intent. He was just retweeting things, some of which were already posted on official state media, which led to his biggest points. How could his tiny little account cause severe disruption? And how could this vague picking quarrels charge possibly apply to him, a peaceful scholar with a clean record?
And this really gets to the heart of it. The state claimed he caused severe public disorder. His response? My Twitter account has less than 100 followers, and most of them are probably bots or inactive accounts anyway. The question he basically asked the court was, how can you accuse a whisper in an empty room of starting a riot?
And just to show how absurd the false information claim was, his defense pointed to one of the prosecution's own exhibits. And what was this dangerous criminal content? It was a retweet from the official account of the U.S. Embassy in China. I mean, what a brilliant way to challenge the whole foundation of their case.
So the prosecution tried to paint him as this major source of disruption, right? Well, the reality was a little different. His defense showed that over 20 years of being online, he had retweeted stuff less than 100 times. That's not a fire hose of disinformation, it's barely even a trickle. So, with all these arguments laid out, the state's case on one side and this really logical defense on the other, what was the final verdict? How did the courts rule on this? The whole process moved incredibly fast. He was arrested in September, indicted by January, and by April, he was sentenced to almost 2 years in prison. He filed an appeal, but just a month later, it was rejected. And here's the kicker. It was rejected behind closed doors, with no public hearing. His legal fight was effectively over. And the final ruling itself? It was just crushingly brief. The court just took all 5 of those carefully crafted defense arguments and dismissed them in a single sentence, saying they were inconsistent with the facts and the law. And that was that. Case closed. But the story doesn't end there. Because while the legal system might have been finished,
Chen Jingyuan wasn't. From prison, he picked up a pen and did what scholars do best. He wrote an analysis of his own case.
And he did not hold back. He called it a case of arrest first, fabricate evidence later. He described the whole thing as a farce, using these classic idioms to say the state was calling a deer a horse, just completely twisting reality. And that it was like a thief yelling, "Stop thief!" And this is where it gets really amazing. He uses his own academic field, complex systems theory, as his final defense. He basically argues that a social network is already a complex, chaotic system. A tiny, tiny input, like his few retweets, simply cannot cause a massive disruption on its own. He argued that, scientifically speaking, the prosecution's claim was impossible. The cause and effect just wasn't there. And that brings us to his final, absolutely chilling conclusion. He takes the court's own logic and just flips it right back at them. He wrote that the real reason he was convicted was because of his high level of education. In their eyes, he argued, his knowledge wasn't a good thing. His knowledge was the crime. And so, the case file closes. But it leaves us with this huge question that goes way beyond this one courtroom. If a scholar's expertise can be used as proof of their guilt, then what is the role of an expert, a thinker, or an academic in any society?